After the Second World War, mathematician and codebreaker Alan Turing proposed what we now know of as the Turing test, what he called the imitation game. Now we all think we know what that is, that if someone makes a machine whose behaviour is indistinguishable from that of a human, we must then consider that machine to be intelligent. But in fact, Turing proposed something rather different, something more interesting and much stranger. As I discuss in this episode with Simon Schaffer, the Turing test has been misrepresented for the past 75 years. And it's led to some fundamental misconceptions about the nature of artificial intelligence, our relationships with machines, and our relationships with each other.
Alan Turing, I can't ignore Alan Turing any discussion about the history of AI. He writes this legendary paper, isn't he, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. And I know you teach the paper, don't you, to students and stuff like that. So first of all, tell us what he actually argues in the paper and what his main kind of thrust of it is.
Turing's paper on computing intelligence is part of a series of talks and drafts and notes and papers Turing was producing from the mid-1940s, from the end of the war onwards. And Turing's argument is, well, rather than engage in a metaphysical debate about what intelligence is, why not approach this as a test? Now there are, after all, I think, annual competitions run by Mr. Loebner, who is a manufacturer of disco dance floors, in which people have to design machines that can convince a remote judge that they are human. That is not how the Turing test was originally set up. It was originally set up in a much more restricted way. Imagine, he says, that you have a man and a woman who are communicating with someone he calls the judge remotely by teletype, we might say by email. And the judge has to decide which of them is the man. So the man has to convince the judge that he's a man, and the woman has to convince the judge that she is a man. That's part one of the imitation game. Now, take the woman away and replace it by a machine. The machine has to do what the woman is supposed to do. So this is a machine that has to pretend to be a woman pretending to be a man. It's a very restricted test. This is not the version of the Turing test that has become ubiquitous now. And there are many things one could say about why Turing sets it up in this highly restricted way, pretending to be a woman, pretending to be a man.
So tell me one of them,
Well, it's been argued by some people that there's an obvious connection with the sexual politics that are involved there. Turing was gay, and he was, after all, persecuted and criminalized for that reason, and it led to his death, his suicide, because of the vicious behavior of the British police state. It's also the case that by restricting the function of the machine, what is it that the machine has to do, you're making it easier for the machine. In other words, rather than imitating general intelligence, you're imitating a very specific, quite complicated, admittedly, but very specific task. The second aspect of it is that Turing discusses a whole series of possible objections to the claim that if the machine convinces the remote judge that the machine is a man, you might as well say that the machine is intelligent. I mean, that's an inference that you need to think about very, very carefully indeed. It relies on the idea that intelligence is an attribute granted by an other to self. So I am intelligent if and only if others treat me as such. And I think that's right, to be honest. I think that the idea of intelligence as attributive and not just innate is a very powerful and compelling maneuver because it correctly situates intelligence in relationships. It's a highly relational model. What is absolute genius in the design of the imitation game, I think, is to replace the metaphysical question, what is it to be intelligent, to which there may not be a satisfactory answer at all, with the much more tractable question, can you design a machine that will pass the imitation game and then simply accept that if you have a machine that passes that test, you should judge it to be intelligent. And what that does is to draw our attention brilliantly to the fact that to be intelligent is a relational judgment. It's a judgment that depends not on an intrinsic capacity alone, or even mainly perhaps, but on a relational judgment by others of self and between selves. And that seems to me to be the right approach. Communicating with others remotely is, he wants to tell us, the perfect case for thinking about intelligence. I think that's an extraordinarily clever, that's an understatement, that's an extraordinarily brilliant and shattering argument. And I keep on coming back to it as well, because it's not, I think, the commonest lesson that is learnt. The commonest lesson that is learnt is the simple one, which he certainly makes, that we will live in a world, and we're now in that world, in which it will be normal to attribute intelligence to machines. But he's not saying, he's certainly not saying that therefore we will be displaced. That's not being said. Or you can therefore estimate the machine independently of anything else in the universe. He's certainly not saying that. He's almost saying the opposite. So if we're thinking now about why, as it might be, a computational parrot like ChatGPT might be said to be intelligent, what we have to understand is the incredibly complex network of relations in which the ChatGPT device is set. The whole model of the discourse on intelligence wants normally to isolate the entity in question. It wants to say, look, there must be some way in which, irrespective of anything else going on in the world, I can say that this thing is intelligent or not. To which the answer is no, you cannot do that. You can only make that attribution if you set the whole thing in the network. And the moment you do that, you realize that it's more than silicon and electrons. For example, no online massive array of texts, no ChatGPT. No. So without the immense contribution of human labor to the material on which this program relies, it doesn't function at all. So the entity which is judged to be intelligent, I'm saying, had better not be thought of as the isolated object, separate from all the support systems and all the networks and all the milieu and all the resources on which this seems to rely.
So actually, what you're saying is the real prescience in Turing's paper, the real sort of cleverness, or it's not so much that he's saying machines will one day be thought to be intelligent,
Which is what he says.
which he does say, but it's actually that what he's really saying is that intelligence only makes any sense when you look at things in relationship to other things.
That is exactly what I think. And I wish that that was the lesson, or at least one of the lessons, that people draw from the paper, right? The reason to substitute the question about intrinsic intelligence with the imitation game is to make sure you never forget how important the relation with others is. Similarly, in other papers written soon before and soon after, he also understands who it is that will resist or criticize or simply be irredeemably skeptical about intelligence attribution under those circumstances, right? He talks about how the managerial class will surround what it does with mysticism in order to resist the thought that what it does could ever be automated, right? Indeed, he talks about how by the end of the century, in other words, by the year 1999, it will be about 70% likely that people will talk of machines as intelligent without any hesitation whatsoever. And it seems to me that his prophecies have been borne out, and then some, right? And because he's using a relational model of intelligence, he can say that. Because he doesn't have to appeal to technological improvement. He doesn't have to appeal to some massive change in what counts as intelligence. He simply has to appeal to changes and intensification in the relations between human-human, human-machine, and machine-machine relationships, which is what he was most interested in, actually.
In the next episode, Simon and I discuss claims that students can use AI to cheat at exams. As Simon points out, it's the education system's own fault, because the way we test today's students is remarkably similar to Turing's imitation game for determining intelligence.
You have a large number of people, each in locked rooms under conditions of absolute silence. The judge's job is to estimate which of the students is the intelligent one. That is the imitation game, right?
If you want to know when the next episode in this series is available, please click the button below to subscribe. Thank you.